Thank you all so
Hi.
much for joining tonight. We're so excited to be here with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Q, an organizer with Virginia Block.
And I'm Samora, the lead organizer at Virginia Block.
We are so excited for y'all to be here with us this evening, and we're grateful that you took the time out of your busy schedule to be here.
Yes. Tonight, we are officially kicking off our summer series, which will be a series of town halls to gain a better understanding and hear from the experts on the issues that you all have voiced mattered most to us. So first, we want to say a huge thank you to our amazing community partners for the entire summer series. We'd like to thank Ivy Baptist Church, and we'd also like to thank Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Lambda Omega Chapter. And for those of you who are new or maybe a little less familiar with Virginia Block, we want to send you a special welcome. We're so happy that you guys are here. VA Block stands for the Virginia Black Leadership Organizing Collaborative. We are a project of New Virginia Majority based in Newport News, and that's where we focus our work.
Our mission is to build empowered communities, and we strive to do that through a three-pronged approach of integrated voter engagement, civic involvement, and leadership development. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So for this first session, I'm so excited because this first session, we're talking all about voting rights. And tonight we have some spectacular panelists here with us. They'll be covering a variety of subjects, from new laws to redistricting to what the fight for voting rights looks like today.
And like we said, tonight is all about helping us better understand our democracy and ways that we can work together to protect and expand it. So please, please, please don't be shy with asking any and every question that you might have.
If you have joined us tonight with questions, we need you to leave with answers. So please, like Samora said, please utilize the chat function and send those questions in.
And without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Sia.
Thank you, Samora and Q, and good evening. I'm Sia Price, and I have the honor of serving as Director of Virginia Block. And since 2016, we have been working to build empowered communities, and we do that by helping community members visualize the change that they want to see and work to achieve it. We have gotten major wins in preventing childhood hunger by getting school meal policies changed, helping and fighting to expand Medicaid, and fighting for access to mental health resources, in addition to protecting and expanding our democracy. Earlier this year, we have shifted to a campaign to build healthier communities, and we are focusing on physical and mental health, economic justice, and public safety, knowing that to get healthy, we have to target the aspects and systems that are making us unwell. In order to jump further into our work, we wanted to learn more about the progress we have made in the last year and a half and what is left to be done in order to best direct our advocacy efforts. And that's why we're here tonight. Tonight, we kick off our summer series, and we're going to be doing 8 virtual discussions on issues that impact the health and vitality of our community. And foundational to any other issue is our democracy. Our conversation begins with voting rights, which is important, especially given what is happening across the country. Voting rights is not just a buzzword. We know that our rights are under attack, but what does that mean for us here in Virginia? Right now, in this moment, we are situated on the historical continuum, 100 years removed from the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, and real lives are still being impacted by that. We are also 1 year out from the murder of George Floyd, as the world was forced to come to grips with the reality of police brutality and the racial reckoning that this country can no longer escape. It's immensely painful sometimes to face how systems are used to oppress Black people. And we know we don't have to go to Ohio or Minnesota to fight. Virginia has its own history and present of systemic racism, including using obstacles to voting access as ways to disenfranchise Black, Indigenous, and people of color residents. That's how we know democracy is so important, because when folks want to take someone's power, they target voting access first. Poll taxes and literacy tests were used to keep Black people from voting in large numbers. but there's hope. Because we also know that change happens when people fight back. We know that in 1963, Evelyn Butts from Norfolk fought in court all the way to the Supreme Court with her legal team to help end poll taxes across the nation. In the late 1950s, Septima Clark of South Carolina created a model of how civics education was a form of resistance, preparing people for life and for their literacy tests so that they could register to vote. And in 2015, Golden Bethune-Hill of Hampton became the lead plaintiff as residents sued the Virginia State Board of Elections, arguing that the Virginia House of Delegates map was unconstitutionally racially gerrymandered and not in compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. They won the lawsuit, and that's why some of our local districts for the House changed as the court redrew the maps. These women knew something was wrong and they worked hard to fix it. So fast forward to 2021, tonight, we are gonna learn some of the things that went right, but some of the things that are also still going wrong. So it will be up to us to say, we're gonna fix it. We know that making it easier for voters to exercise their right is the right thing to do, but we will also hear about the work we have left in making sure that Virginia stays protected and that our family and friends in other states get the same protections as well. We can't get comfortable, but we can get educated and active. You're going to hear from some pretty dope panelists this evening, folks working hard in the trenches on voting rights, among other justice issues. I've worked with each of them on legislation, especially the Voting Rights Act of Virginia, in my other job as delegate. They will talk about new laws, redistricting, and what the fight for voting rights looks like across the nation. I want you to listen to everything that you're hearing this evening with an ear for actions we can take next, because our action plan will be based on information we hear in the summer series. So thank you again for joining us this evening. I am really excited that you're here. And next we'll hear from Shara, who is a member of Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Lambda Omega Chapter. Hey, Shara.
Let me come off mute. Sorry. Hi, Sia. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this evening. Tram Nguyen is co-executive director of New Virginia Majority. Since 2009, Tram has been fighting against voter suppression here in Virginia and across the country. She played a key role in Virginia's current rights restoration policy, and over the last several years, she has worked with legislators and stakeholders to make voting easier for all Virginians. She worked especially on vote by mail and the Voting Rights Act of Virginia. She recently took a leave of absence to work alongside Stacey Abrams as Fair Fights Voter Protection Director for the Georgia runoff. This evening, Tram will be discussing Virginia's new voting laws that have passed since 2020. Delegate Marcus Simon represents the 53rd District in the Virginia House of Delegates, based in Falls Church, Virginia. He has been serving since 2014 and serves as chair of the Privileges and Elections Committee and is a member of the Virginia Redistricting Committee. He also serves as chair of the Housing and Consumer Protection on the General Laws Committee and serves on the Courts of Justice Committee and the Rules Committee. He's a lifelong resident of Fairfax County and a practicing attorney. Tonight, Delegate Simon will share with us updates on the Redistricting Commission and the process for residents to get involved. And finally, Leah Aden joined the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund Incorporated in 2012 and has served as a Deputy Director of Litigation since October 2018. In that role, she assists in LDF's voting rights and redistricting work. They use litigation, policy, and public education strategies to ensure that Black people have equal access to the political process, economic opportunity, and environmental justice. Leah was a member of the LDF's litigation team in the Shelby v. Holder Supreme Court case that ended in the gutting of Section 5, the heart of the Voting Rights Act. Leah has remained vigilant in tracking post-Shelby voting changes, and she authored Democracy Diminished, State and Local Threats, to voting post-Shelby County, Alabama v. Holder, which detailed state, county, and local voting changes. Tonight, she will highlight what's going on in voting rights around the country and the work that LDF does. We're really excited to have these panelists with us this evening, so we'll jump right in. Now we'll hear from Tram Nguyen, and then Virginia Bloc member Madani will be asking questions that the audience submitted. And please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A feature in the webinar or in the comment section on the Virginia Bloc Facebook page.
Good evening. Thank you so much to Virginia Bloc for hosting this conversation tonight. And thank you, Shira, for that nice and warm introduction. Again, my name is Tram Nguyen, and I am the co-executive of New Virginia Majority and have been working on voting rights for, I feel like, my entire life. It's my hard work. If you asked me 10 years ago if Virginia could possibly be leading the way on voting rights and the expansion of access to our democracy, I don't actually know what my answer would have been. In 2010 and 2011 and 12 and 13, leading right up to the Shelby v. Holder case, we were fighting voter suppression year after year after year in the General Assembly, from things like photo ID requirements to restricting and making it harder for folks to vote absentee. And it's taken, quite frankly, this entire decade to reverse course. Even, just a few years ago in 2018, Virginia was 49th in the nation in terms of access to voting. So it's been quite a turn since 2020, and I'm happy to share some of the recent voting changes that we've had since the General Assembly switched power from Republicans to Democrats, to have folks and champions like Delegate Simon and Delegate Price, who have been, just big crusaders for voting rights. So it's been a privilege to work with both of them in this capacity. Folks are probably wondering if the changes we made last year are actually sticking, because 2020 was a big COVID year and there are lots of changes, and how many of those changes were just because, folks had to socially distance and wear masks and stay at home. Well, it's, those changes are permanent. So when we think about the laws that Virginia has changed since 2020 and now 2021, we have automatic voter registration at the DMV. So anytime you do a DMV transaction, you change your address, you change your license, you apply for a new license, you change your tags, you will be automatically registered to vote unless you have an option to opt out of it. Otherwise, you would be registered to vote, and your information gets automatically sent to the Department of Elections to register or to update your status. This is important. It's been a movement across the country in terms of what we call AVR, because we're trying to remove as many barriers to voter registration as possible. We have no excuse absentee voting now. So just 2 years ago, if folks tried to vote by mail or vote at home, they had to basically provide a rationale for why they were requesting an absentee ballot. So I have to work 13 hours and I might not make it to the polls, or I am attending school in a different county. And so there were very specific excuses that you had to provide in order to vote by mail. And that is no longer the case. Anybody who wants to vote at home is able to do so, no questions asked. And in fact, you can do that on a permanent basis now. You can actually just submit one application and say, from here on out, unless I tell you otherwise, go on ahead and send that ballot to my house every election, and then you don't have to worry about it. And that's actually what I did. I signed up to be a permanent absentee voter, and this June primary was actually the first test. I was like, are they really going to send me that ballot? And sure enough, they did. So it works, y'all. So if anybody wants to just vote at home, you can do so, and you don't have to apply every single year, every single election. We have a 45-day early voting period, one of the longest in the country. I think Minnesota has a 45-day early voting period, and maybe one or two other states. But that means that you have a very big window in order to, you know, educate yourself on the candidates and to go ahead and cast a ballot. Again, making it as convenient as possible for folks to vote when they can. We have drop boxes, so if you vote by mail and you don't want to, you know, put a stamp on it and send it back in, or you know, you want to hand deliver it, but you don't want to actually interact with another human being, because there are some folks that, you know, just don't want to do that, or you know, don't want to park their car, lock it, and go into the office. There are convenient drop boxes, right, where you can just roll on and they're secure, and you can just stick your ballot right in the mail and it gets collected by the registrar every day. We have an option now to allow for Sunday voting. So I know that, you know, Souls to the Polls is a big effort in a lot of communities. And so localities can choose to provide Sunday voting as an option during that early voting period now, which we didn't have before this year. And that'll start going into effect this year. Delegate Price put in a bill, and it passed, to make curbside voting easier for folks and more recognizable. So if there's a long line and you need accommodations, every polling place not only will have curbside voting available, but we'll be very clear on how to actually access curbside voting. And so you don't have to, you know, the whole point, right, is that you can't get out of your car and you can't wait in line. So if you have to go inside to tell somebody that you're outside trying to vote by curbside, it sort of defeats the purpose. And we have pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. So you can go ahead and have young folks pre-register to vote. So as soon as they become eligible to vote in an election, they're about to turn 18, they can automatically be registered to vote and, you know, can cast their ballot without having to think about it again. So those are some of the big changes that in terms of election administration, but I would be remiss to not mention the Voting Rights Act of Virginia, which Delegate Price carried. And, you know, it was a pleasure to work with Leah at LDF and Delegate Simon as the chair of the P&E committee to make sure that that bill got through. It is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, Voting Rights Act in the country. It has protections that were modeled after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so when Shelby v. Holder gutted pre-clearance, and Virginia was a pre-clearance state, what Delegate Price did with her Voting Rights Act was reinstated some of those protections to make sure that every time a locality, you know, try to make a voting change, that it didn't negatively impact our right to vote. That it didn't suppress the vote of any of our protected communities. And so it's significant, and I can't thank Delegate Price enough for her leadership on getting that through. So that's a kind of a broad overview of the voting changes. I know that there probably are some questions, and I think Madonna, you had some questions that were submitted in advance.
Yes, hi. So if you all don't know, my name is Madani. I have worked with VA BLOC. Now I'm just volunteering my time to speak, and I've been an organizing intern. I have been a Democracy Fellow and a digital organizer, and it is my pleasure to ask you these questions because they are very prominent on my mind, and I want to see if you know the answer to a couple of these. So the first one I wanted to ask, are formerly incarcerated people's rights, like citizens' rights, automatically restored now, or what is the status on that?
So it is. So sort of yes, but not in a way that that is going to be permanent. So right now, the Constitution of Virginia allows the governor to restore voting rights and civil rights to formerly incarcerated folks. And it's up to the governor to sort of pursue whichever avenue that that he wants in terms of restoration of rights. And it used to be that you had to apply. You had to, for some folks, you had to have a 5-year waiting period and then apply, and it was all subjective. Currently, Governor Northam does a form of automatic rights restoration, in that as soon as you are released from incarceration, they're able to restore your rights, but it's done still on an individual basis, and a certificate gets mailed to you, and then you're able to register to vote. It's not, fail safe. There are folks that do fall through the cracks if we don't have updated contact information for folks, et cetera. And so that's the process that's in place. What we really need to do is to change that Virginia Constitution and say that it is no longer going to be in the hands of the governor. So we don't have to worry every 4 years when the governorship changes hands, what the next governor is going to do, right? And so what we are trying to do with a number of organizations and a lot of partners on the call, right, on tonight's call, is to pass that constitutional amendment. And the good thing is that the General Assembly did pass an amendment this year. It'll have to be passed again next year. And then next, assuming that happens in the 2022 session in January, February of 2022, next November, we all get to vote to approve that amendment. And what that amendment will do is essentially restore the right to vote for anybody who's been released, as long as, so basically, if you are during your time of not imprisonment, of non-incarceration, you have your right to vote and nobody can take that away. It's only during that period of incarceration that your voting rights are essentially on pause, so to speak.
Well, that is honestly awesome. It's great to know. And before I forget, I wanted to ask a question that was, asked in the live chat. Where are the drop boxes located, and what's the time limit on these drop boxes?
That's a really great question. And so our election system is a little bit of a federation where the state provides a lot of the laws and the rules on what localities can and can't do. And then oftentimes localities have some flexibility on how they implement it. So it's going to vary by every county or city in terms of how many drop boxes they make available that are outside, that are separate from polling places. And so, for example, right now I live in the city of Richmond, and the drop box is located in the registrar's office. Neighboring county, Henrico, actually has several drop boxes available right now during this early voting period. I think they have 5, and they make those locations known to people. And then on election day, essentially every polling place will have a drop box. And the great thing about that is sometimes you applied and you had a ballot mailed to you and then you forgot to put it in the mail and you're like, oh my goodness, I forgot to drop it off, but I have it and it's election day and I want to turn it in. And then you drive up and there's a long line. You're like, I don't want to wait in that long line. I already filled out my ballot, right? And so every polling place on election day will have a drop box location where you can just drop off the ballot that you've already filled out, and that's going to be available at every. So that's the one consistent thing is on election day itself. Every polling place will have a drop box, but in terms of other additional places outside of that and outside of the registrar's office, it really does depend by locality.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks for clarifying that. Last question I have for you is, how can individuals or faith communities rather advocate for voting rights, especially including ex-offenders?
Yes, I mean, that's the big effort. So as I mentioned earlier, we have to pass it again in the next General Assembly session, which means call your senator, call your delegate, call your representative, and say, we really want you to pass that amendment language again. I don't ever take anything for granted in the General Assembly, even though it passed pretty with broad support this year. We have to keep the pressure on and we have to still encourage folks. And when they make the right decision to pass something like that, we have to thank them, right? It's continuing and maintaining relationships with our elected officials. And then the big thing though is voters have to vote for it, right? It's not just the 100 people in the House and 40 people in the Senate that get to decide whether we change this Constitution or not. It's up to our voters. And so we're going to have to go into every community, to all your churches and your local communities and everywhere you can to talk about it, and to basically inform and educate people that this thing is coming. And if you believe in redemption, if you believe that, someone's past mistakes should not permanently determine their future, right? And that we want to make sure that our communities are thriving, that rights restoration is a big part of that. Because ultimately we're going to need 51% of Virginia voters to say yes to that amendment so that we can change it. And so that it's not on the whim of a single individual who happens to sit in the governor's mansion every 4 years.
Awesome.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Tram and Madani. We will also be getting into some of the specifics about the local elections and how to access your right to vote. And next, we're going to hear from Delegate Simon, who represents the 53rd District, is chair of the Privileges and Elections Committee, but also a member of the Redistricting Commission. Now, Delegate Simon is going to walk a very fine line because there is language in the code that says that as a commissioner, he can't really talk about the maps. So a lot of the questions that we can answer with Delegate Simon are the logistics and the mechanics of the commission, but Tram and Leah and I will also be able to answer some of your other questions. And then we're also going to have Sherry ask questions of Delegate Simon, and she is a member of Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Lambda Omega Chapter. So Delegate Simon, take it away.
Thank you, Sia. Thanks. It's great to be here with you all. Yes, thank you for the little bit of the caveat. So if I have to punt or phone a friend, it's not that I'm being difficult or that I'm being slimy or slippery. That's what I'm looking for, like a politician sometimes is. It's that I may be. So here's the code. The code says commissioners shall not communicate with any person outside the commission about matters relating to reapportionment or redistricting outside of a public meeting or hearing. So I can't talk to you about redistricting, but I can talk to you about the commission. So that's a little bit of a nuance that I'm going to try and walk through. The other good news is I helped write this statute and being the chair of Privileges and Elections, I happen to know that there's no penalty for violating it, but we're still going to try and stay within the law, even if I can't get arrested or fined if I make a mistake, but we'll do our best with that. So let me just give you guys a quick explanation of how we're doing redistricting in 2021, why it's not done yet, and how it's a little bit different than what we've done in the past. And then I'm happy to take some questions from everybody. So in the past, 2001, 2011, 1991, 1981, whatever party controlled the General Assembly would draw the new maps. They get the census data at the beginning of the year, usually February, end of February, early March, get together, generally in a caucus room, and the leadership of the party in charge would draw maps, generally with two purposes. One, to maintain their partisan control, and two, incumbent protection. And often, historically, to keep incumbent protection meant keeping the people in power, and that meant marginalizing communities of color in particular, but all kinds of disadvantaged communities. And so you'd find lines drawing right through African-American neighborhoods so that they, even if they all voted, even if you could pass the literacy test that folks were talking about earlier, and even if you could get yourself to the poll, and even if you hadn't been disenfranchised for some other reason, and you did vote, your vote was going to be so diluted because you're going to have a little part of your community lumped in with a much larger part of a community that didn't really have much in common with you, where you didn't have many common interests. So, and it's interesting, we had a conversation today at our redistricting commission about how it used to work. And when the Democrats were in charge, the Republicans didn't even try, didn't even bother to participate. They just knew they were going to vote no on whatever the Democrats came up with. And Democrats knew that no matter what the Republicans did, they were going to vote no, and they'd sue them later. And hopefully they do get a little bit better result under the Voting Rights Act. So that's how it used to be. This year is going to be different. It's not necessarily what I would have or would have created if we were drafting a commission for ourselves, but it's going to be a bipartisan commission. It's not a nonpartisan commission, which a lot of people have described it that way. So it's got an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. You've got four legislators, four legislators from each party, two legislators from each house, right? So you got two House Democrats, two House Republicans, two Senate Democrats, two Senate Republicans, and then each house, each caucus appointed two citizen members. So you got two citizen members appointed by the leadership of the House, Democrats, and so forth, right? So everybody there is either a Democrat or a Republican, or appointed by a Democrat or Republican for their partisan loyalty, essentially, right? And so, but the idea is, instead of making it nonpartisan and citizen-oriented, is to make it that we cancel each other out. And so sort of out of necessity and by design, we are forced to compromise and come up with a map that doesn't favor unfairly one party over the other. So That commission was appointed at the end of November, right after the referendum passed. Citizen commissioners were a list was hastily assembled, and they were picked, and they were in place by January 1st. We had a meeting in February, and we now been waiting for census data ever since. So it's a little bit different this year. Normally we'd be pretty close to done. We'd be putting the finishing touches on the districts. This year, we don't even have the redistricting data from the census yet, and it's not going to come until the middle of August, which is a good news, bad news sort of scenario. The bad news is it means we're not going to be able to redraw districts in time for this year's House of Delegates elections. So we're all going to run in our existing districts in 2021. The good news is it's really given the citizen commissioners an opportunity to catch up as far as knowledge and understanding of the process, and it's giving citizens far more opportunities to participate in the redistricting process than they otherwise would have. And so although Sia and I didn't necessarily love the constitutional amendment, we did put in some language into code, which is helping a lot with the process. For instance, we enacted a statute that says all meetings and hearings held by the commission shall be adequately advertised and planned to ensure the public is able to attend and participate fully. Meetings and hearings will be advertised in multiple languages and so forth. So one of the advantages, we're hearing a lot from citizen members, although frankly, we could hear more. The first couple of meetings of the commission, we had a lot of folks signed up for public comment, and they told us what their thoughts were about redistricting. I'm afraid as sometimes happens, we're wearing the public out. And so today we didn't have any public comment at our subcommittee meeting. At our last full commission meeting, we only heard from three people. So one of the ways that you all can help, and you'll have an opportunity to help, is to get involved and get organized and participate in all of our meetings. Every meeting we have has a public comment opportunity, and we have scheduled now, or the subcommittee that does outreach, that the commission is planning on holding 8 public hearings, which is more than the amendment and frankly more than the statute requires. 4 meetings before the maps are drawn. And at those meetings before the maps are drawn, that's where we're really going to need help from groups like VA Bloc and New Virginia Majority. One of the things we need to do is determine what communities of interest will look like, right? So the criteria that we've got in the Delegate Price's criteria bill that we passed last year says that the commission needs to draw these districts to preserve communities of interest. So that gerrymandering trick I told you about, where sometimes you go through a community and cut it up into 4 different pieces, so you dilute it into 4 different districts, that's not going to be allowed anymore. But what you need to do is sometimes the communities of interest aren't obvious, right? A county is sure it is. A city can be a community of interest, but a lot of times you'll find that a community really exists on both sides of a boundary. Sometimes at the edge of Richmond City, and the city in Rico County, parts of it may have more in common with each other than Richmond as a whole does within Rico as a whole, and so forth. So you guys can help us define those communities of interest during the public hearings that will happen beforehand. Also, all of the data that we use to redistrict is going to be available on our website. So if you wanted to, if you're really ambitious, a group of citizens could get together and they could draw their own map. Say, look, this is what we think the map ought to look like, and submit a full map of 100 districts for the commission to look at. Or you can pick a region and draw the own map. Say, here's what we think Hampton Roads ought to look like. This is what we think the peninsula should be drawn like. And you can submit whole maps because you'll have all the data and tools that we use to draw the maps. So there's that I think is a big improvement over how the process has worked in the past. But that only works if citizens step up and take advantage of the opportunities that are there to participate. So we will get our data. I don't know if I said this or not. We'll get data in the middle of August. So we'll have hearings probably over the summer, and then hearings again in the fall. And then we have 45 days after we receive the data, which is expected August 16th, to draw maps, and then 7 days to hold the General Assembly session. So Sia and I will be back down in Richmond sometime in the middle of October, right in the middle of campaign season, to vote on new maps for redistricting. So I'll stop there. And good, somebody put the link in the chat, but we did create a new redistricting website. You used to have to kind of dig through the Division of Legislative Services site to find it, and it was pretty hard to navigate. One of the things the citizen commissioners in particular really pushed for was to create a standalone website for the commission that would be much easier for citizens to navigate. And it is virginiaredistricting.org. So with that, I will stop now. I know that there are some questions that were submitted in advance. I tried not to answer them yet, but maybe I did. And any other questions that come up, I'm happy to entertain. And if I can't answer them, I'll punt.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Delegate Simon, for that very, very thorough and important information that you provided. Yeah, you did answer some of the questions that I have for you this evening, but because you referenced that website that you have, and it's in the chat as well. But what can residents do to learn more so that we're informed when we speak up at the commission meetings, other than going to the website?
Yeah, so I think the website, I mean, the website itself has some good information, some good background information on the law. It also has, one of the other things, one of the advantages of the pandemic is we're meeting this way and everything's recorded, right? So if somebody wanted to, the fact that you may have missed a meeting or that you can't get there isn't necessarily going to be a barrier to getting up to speed. You can go back. I know we all have lives, and who wants to go back and watch a bunch of tedious meetings, but if you wanted to, you could. Also, there's written comments there on the website that'll help get you up to speed. So, you can become an expert on it if you want. There are also, I mean, there are lots of websites and publications and tools. And I think that Sia even put in the chat that the VA block has going to put on some lessons about how to do redistricting maps. So what I'm looking forward to is getting some data out there and starting to let the public play with it a little bit. I've advocated for, we'll see if it happens or not, but I've advocated for having a contest similar to what would happen 10 years ago. Let's put it out to the public and say, you guys draw maps, tell us what you want to see. And we may not adapt a whole map, but it'll give us a different perspective than what legislators are sort of used to looking at.
Yeah. Okay, well, you talked about the census a little bit earlier, but how exactly does the census relate to redistricting?
Sure. So, and it's interesting because we've had some folks say, well, what do we need to wait for the census data for anyway, right? Why can't we just draw the districts based on other population estimates and surveys and things that are out there? So, the reason we redistrict, let me back up for a second. The reason we redistrict every 10 years is that there's Supreme Court federal case law that says that everybody's entitled to an equal vote, essentially, right? One person, one vote is the principle. And if you had a congressional district where you had one congressperson for 7 million people, and then you had 10 more where everybody got 100,000, that wouldn't be a good way to divide up a state of 8 million people, because some people would have a lot more influence and a lot more representation than others. So we try and get all the congressional districts into be the same size. And of course, populations move around and people shift. In places like Loudoun County has grown a great deal. And Fredericksburg, Stafford County, parts south of DC and north of Richmond have grown a lot, whereas far southwest Virginia, coal country, has gotten less populous. So we need to move things around to make sure that everybody's votes count equally. And then the census actually breaks down the state into literally 100, I think it's a huge number. I don't want to get it wrong, but by order of magnitude of census blocks. Which could be like as small as an apartment building, could be its own census block. And that's the really fine data that we use to fine tune our districts. And we also have a lot of demographic information that the census provides to help us know who lives in a block like that. In fact, what's interesting about one of the things that's slowing things down is the census data has gotten so discrete, and people now have the ability to match against other kinds of databases. We're having a hard time protecting the individual identities of people that live in census data blocks, because you don't want somebody to go. This is sort of the way that they catch criminals with DNA. Once you start matching a couple other databases, all of a sudden you know who they are. So we don't want people being unmasked through the redistricting process. So at any rate, you want to use the best data you've got, the most discrete data you've got, to make sure that you get those districts right. And there's other data that's much less reliable. You really wouldn't want to count on when you're talking about something as important as guaranteeing one person, one vote.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for that. Final question that I have for you this evening. Did we lose any congressional seats with the 2020 census results?
No, so reapportionment's done. So I think I'm safe to talk about it now because it's not really a process anymore. It's over. And Virginia is going to have 11 congressional districts again. Didn't gain or lose. The population of Virginia grew a little bit, not a huge amount, but about the same, roughly the same level of growth as the rest of the country. So some parts of the country grew faster and some parts grew slower than Virginia. Virginia was right about average with the rest of the country. So we held on to the seats that we have. It's interesting, New York lost a congressional seat because about 130 people, I want to say. Something, it was a really small amount of folks. So I know all the work that you guys did for a complete count here in Virginia was very important. And it's important again when we draw these districts too, because just like New York lost a whole congressional seat, if communities aren't fully counted, that's going to affect, you know, how large or small of a district they wind up being in. And so we want to make sure we know who everybody is and where they all are. So it's all been important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Delegate Simon.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both, Delegate Simon. I think it was 86. I think it was 86 people. If 86 more people in New York had been counted, it is possible that they would not have lost that congressional seat. So thank you so much. We will keep that in our memory banks for the next census, but now we know how important redistricting is. I did drop in the chat there, have a meeting. We'll see Delegate Simon on the screen again at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And so you can watch it and kind of see what's going on with what they're doing. But thank you both, Sherry and Delegate Simon. So next we are going to hear from Leah Aden, and that is, as Sherry introduced, she is an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and is one of the folks that was working really hard on the Voting Rights Act of Virginia. So Leah, oh, and we'll have questions by Shannon, a member of Virginia Bloc. Leah, take it away.
Thank you. So that last lesson about New York, where I'm sitting right now, is to remind us that every person matters in the decennial census. Every single person matters and needs to be counted. So good evening, everyone. I am very thankful to Sia Price and the rest of the Virginia Bloc team for inviting me to participate in this summer series on voting rights. I really gel with Tram and her passion for this issue. This has become part of my passion as well, and not just work. As you've heard and as you've been witnessing and experiencing, there is so much going on in our communities and across the country, not just with respect to voting rights, but with the pandemic, with the violence inflicted upon our communities and more. And all of it is connected to accessing power. While more people are participating and becoming aware of the political process, and that this is a process and it is a constant process, as with other periods of expansion in our country's history, we are being met in many, many areas of our country. It looks like Virginia is trying to separate itself from these other areas of the country in a good way. But we're being met by what is pretty much a vicious effort, a violent effort in response to our political engagement, and to limit who can participate, and particularly to restrict the access of people of color, of young people, and other historically disenfranchised groups. Access to the ballot and the ability to cast a meaningful vote once you cast that ballot. This is one of the most pressing issues in front of us. The people who are intent on shutting us out, they understand, as we have, and as all of the heroes and sheroes that Sia mentioned in the beginning, and all the people who have made it possible for us, we understand that the political process opens the door for us to be represented and to push for policies and resources that can improve our lives in many areas of lives. And these are the policies that Virginia Bloc has pushed for and won, as well as the ones that it continues to push for. My brief opening remarks will focus on LDF's nonpartisan current voting rights work and what else is going on across the nation. So first, LDF is preparing to embark on one of the most monumental events that is immediately ahead of us. This is redistricting, which you have begun to hear about from Delegate Simon. This is the process of drawing lines at all levels of government, from Congress and the state legislatures that you heard about, but also with regard to our county commissions, our school boards, our city councils, and all the other local bodies that we don't even think about. They hold power as well. And these lines will stay in place for at least the next 10 years. And the process impacts thousands of jurisdictions across the country. So we're talking about many, many in the state of Virginia, and extrapolate that by all of the states across the country. This preparation and the level of engagement now and over the next few years is critical because of the tasks that we have to commit to ensure fair and non-discriminatory maps on behalf of the communities where we live, but also where our families live, where our friends live, and where the communities that we love live. What do I mean when I say that LDF is preparing for redistricting? So we're focusing on certain jurisdictions, and we're surveying opportunities to redistrict from top to bottom at all levels of government to ensure that Black voting power isn't being minimized purposefully or through indirectly through the processes. That is, we're looking for opportunities to unpack Black voters from existing bodies where they have been packed together in order to minimize our power. And we want to uncrack the maps that have been spread Black voters out among too many districts to dilute our power, where we could otherwise coalesce and elect people who will respond to our needs. And we're making sure that communities know that above all else, balancing populations between districts and not diluting communities of color, those are requirements under the law that no one can run away from. Those must trump any other considerations that bodies are considering. We are identifying partners in the areas of the country where we're focusing, and we're assessing who's going to focus on this city council while we're going to be focused over here on these school boards. We have to divide and we have to conquer so that our eyes are everywhere. We're identifying experts, specifically map makers and political scientists, to help us assess these opportunities to redistrict and consider them alongside the maps, alongside political data, so that we know how these maps will actually function in practice for Black communities and other communities of color based upon past voting patterns. We're identifying who has the power to draw these lines. In some places, it's the body that we're looking at. In other places, you have to go to the state legislature to get sign off. In other places, you may have to go to voters to get their approval. And as you've begun to hear, there are some commissions that will be in charge of redrawing the lines for some, but not all bodies. We're figuring out the timing of all of this. As you've heard, in normal times, we would have already been engaged in this process. It would have been underway because we would have had the data that we needed to redistrict. But some of this data, as you've heard, this race data and this data related to our demographics and our voting age populations, it is delayed, and we're unable to have accurate data in this moment to begin the process. Though, as you've heard, we're expected to hear to get it later this summer and at the latest by September of this year. Even with the delay, we are assessing now how all of that impacts the timing and how we are going to sequence the redistricting that is done from Congress down to our local level of government. And even without the accurate up-to-date data, we are using the 2010 data and some estimates that have been derived since then, as well as election data and other data, to start assessing preliminarily until we have the up-to-date data, what is possible, what is potentially possible, so that we're not just responding when the data is released. And finally, with respect to redistricting, we're determining our plan for engagement, including needing to react to the maps that are being proposed by elected officials, and are preparing to affirmatively present our own maps. We're considering what written and oral testimony is necessary and that our partners can offer to official bodies. All of this engagement is necessary to ensure that we're trying to get the best maps possible during the process, because litigation is not a sure thing and it is long and expensive. And so we also want to push for the best map during the process, but prepare for litigation and create the record that we need in order to go to court if it's necessary. All of these are things that if LDF is doing now, all of the people that we work with can also be doing now on their own or in partnership with us. I want to flag that the Legal Defense Fund where I work and the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, as well as the Asian American Justice Center, we recently released a guide that walks through all of this in many pages, and we are happy to make sure you have access to that. Finally, before I stop, I would be remiss if I didn't address this second big bucket of work that is currently making us lose sleep at night. And that is responding to the proposed or enacted voter suppression that is spreading like a disease across this country, from Georgia to Florida to Texas to South Carolina to Louisiana and Michigan. LDF has been urging elected officials to refrain from limiting opportunities to participate and taking them to court when they adopt laws that restrict voting by mail, that restrict early voting, that restrict drop boxes, that throw out certain provisional ballots, and that criminalize the work of third-party organizations and election officials who try to help voters, including by returning completed ballots and providing voters water while they're waiting in too long of lines to participate. These types of restrictions either deny or they make it harder to vote, and they're meant to intimidate voters. And all of this is being done because they want us to give up and they want to shut us out of the process. So much of this is being done in response to the big lie that our recent elections were not secure, though that lie has been rejected by federal courts and state courts, and it is lacking in any evidence all across the country. So in short, we are preparing for redistricting and responding to the rampant voter suppression that is right in front of us. There is so much more that we're doing in terms of urging Congress to help us and urging state legislatures like here in Virginia to do what is within their ambit of authority to do. There's so much that we are doing, but those are some of the big buckets, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
All right, thank you so much for that great information, Leah. I am particularly very excited to be talking to you. I am a 2013 graduate of Howard University School of Law, so it is awesome to be talking to you. First, I just wanted to share, for me, a big part of the reason why I went to law school is because of voting rights and the work of LDF. So in 2009, I was interning in the national office for NAACP. And that year we organized a protest at the US Supreme Court because there was another case that was going before the court that was essentially gutting out parts of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And I remember that day feeling the irony of standing in front of this building that says equal justice under the law, and once again fighting to protect our rights and access to be able to vote. And so for me, seeing the lawyers from LDF coming down the steps of the Supreme Court, I thought to myself, like, I want to be on the inside. I want to be in the courtroom helping make some change happen. And I remember also that day, there were law students from Howard Law there that were also part of the protest. So in that one moment, I decided that, like, I want to take my NAACP work, inside the courtroom, and I wanted to go to Howard University School of Law. So, so it's so special to be talking to you here today. You kind of touched on some of these things, but we've been seeing some crazy things being passed in different states around the country. So what can we do to prevent some of those things from happening here in Virginia?
Yes, great question, because it is a slippery slope. Our history is about expanding and then the constrictions on the right to vote. And so we have to be ever vigilant that we don't start going in the opposite direction. The first thing I think is really important is that we need to educate ourselves and all of our networks constantly about why these measures are restrictive and unnecessary. Why it is difficult to get an ID, why it is difficult to wait in line for hours at a time if you have certain types of employment. Why Georgia is responding to what happened in the 2020 elections and the runoff with the constrictions that they are doing. We need to be talking about this and we need to be scrutinizing it. And that needs to be part of a constant dialogue that we are having in this country. The other thing I think we have to do is to engage in voting all the time, right? It is one thing to come out for presidential elections or a pivotal senatorial election. It's another thing to show up for your district attorney election, to show up for your elected judicial bodies, for your city council and school boards, for your tax assessor, for your probate judge, for your secretary of state. All of these, I liken these to like the kicker on the football team or the, the person who's not the quarterback. These are not the most sexy of the jobs, but they hold so much power, and we need to understand the power and we need to participate in who is holding those positions. I think we should urge people right now to representatives to be supporting federal legislation like the legislation that would allow people with felony convictions to vote in federal elections, or HR 1, that is a sort of omnibus election bill that will address some of the administrative shortcomings in our systems, as well as some of the voter suppression and systemic issues. And finally, I feel like if you're in a place in Virginia that is recognizing its authority and trying to expand access to the ballot box, keep pushing. There is access and ensuring that 100% of people participate, and that is a constant refrain of people entering the political process, and that people are not getting kicked out of the process for reasons that are immaterial to their ability to participate in the political process. This is a constant thing that we must be vigilant about. And if the push now is to allow people to take away from the governor's executive authority, that's sort of at the whim of who's in office, the ability to participate, ask yourself, why can people in Maine and Vermont, a largely majority white state, vote while they're incarcerated, but they can't vote in another place? Keep pushing the line, because if it's good enough for certain people, it should be good enough for communities of color. There's many things to do, but if we are engaged on this issue and we recognize its importance and that it is a constant thing, this electoral process, then I think we will be moving in the right direction.
All right, awesome. Thank you much for that. Thank you so much for that information. So we know, as you just stated, the fight to protect voting rights is an ongoing battle. So can you just share with us a little bit about what it's like to be a Black woman continuously fighting to protect voting rights, especially in light of the history regarding that fight?
So I think it's an honor. I think it's a privilege to be able to represent my clients, and oftentimes these are leaders in their community who have pushed the legislative process as far as they can and have been rebuffed oftentimes. And so they come to me and they say, can we take this to court? And then I use this limited skill to help push this issue forward in the hope that we get justice. So I think it's an honor to do that. I think the hardest part and the most disenchanting part is I think we often marshal the facts and we marshal the evidence to show that Black people oftentimes have been mistreated and that their rights have been denied or otherwise limited, and not enough judges or policymakers or others have the courage to recognize that and to redress it. I think that is the most disenchanting thing, is to know that you have the just perspective and to have people fail you in positions of power. And then I would finally say, just because you mentioned Howard and you mentioned my particular role as a Black woman attorney, there are not enough Black women attorneys doing voting rights work. And there are just simply not enough Black lawyers. 5% of all lawyers are Black people. And if you think about Black women, that's even smaller percentage. So not only do we need more women, people of color attorneys, but we also need everyone in every facet of their life. If you are in the corporate world, if you are in the sports world, if you are in the arts world, if you are, whatever your position is, if we don't know now the inequities in our society, and we don't know the continuing role, the way that race and other identities matter in people's lives and you're not doing something about it, then you are part of the problem. And so everyone has to be doing something. And if you're not doing something, then that means you're okay with oppression, and that cannot be okay.
Thank you so much. Snaps to all that.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Leah. That was a really powerful segment. This has all been so wonderful, and I'm not going to talk too long because we have more questions from the audience that we want to dive straight into for all of our panelists. So whoever wants to answer, feel free to jump on in. So our first audience question is, what are the implications of redistricting beyond just what the map looks like? And I guess I actually will direct that one to Delegate Simon if he's able to answer that one.
Sure. So the question is, and it's interesting, we heard about this at different levels. So we're going to, redistrict at the commission. We redistrict the 11 congressional districts, the 100 House of Delegates districts, and the 40 Senate districts. So I mean, it's not just drawing maps, right? It's also, in some ways, can be a battle for control of the legislature. And I expect, I'll just say this part of it, I mean, I expect that the rub is going to come when you have an even number of Republicans and Democrats. You look at a state like Virginia that's elected Democrats statewide by margins of 55 and 58 and 60% over the last few years. What's fair, right? I mean, I think fair means that you have, out of 100 delegates, because that's an easy one to do the math on, 55, 56, 57, right? Because that's what that's how Virginia votes. I suspect Republicans will be like, no, 50-50 is fair. And it's hard to argue with that, right? Hey, 50-50 sounds fair, but it's not. It really diminishes our vote. So that's what's at stake, is do we have like fair maps that truly reflect Virginia as it is in 2021, or do we, compromise so much that we actually lose sight of what's really fair? So that's I think what's at stake, and that's where we need groups like VA BLOC and others to sort of help articulate, what does fair mean to me? What is it that I'm looking for? What is my community, and what does my community expect out of this process?
Thank you so much, Delegate Simon. That's definitely food for thought.
Hey, Samora, I'm sorry. I saw Leah's hands going for the unmute, and I would love to know if you had something to add.
Only very briefly is that you have a right to representation no matter if you can vote or not, right? So the whole point of allocating people as equally as possible between districts is that if you are a child, if you are a non-citizen, if you are a person incarcerated, if you have a right to have someone represent you and respond to your needs. That's simply about representation. Then there's the question of, do you have a right to elect your candidate of choice? And that is through the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution and other things. And that is for that is about who is eligible to vote. And that is subject to a lot of different determinations across the country. But ultimately, representation and electing your candidate of choice is all about putting people, and when you represent someone, the goal of having balance is that you don't have to compete for their attention to access your policy issues anymore. You don't have to spend any more time or effort than your neighbor in another district. With voting, you can vote someone in or out if they don't. The goal is to vote someone in or out if they don't represent you. But all of that is so that you have someone in power who can respond to your needs. And that is what this whole thing about. People didn't die. People have not been sacrificing over generation or generation just so that they could struggle to get to the polls and drop something in a ballot and then walk away. It is meant to change their lives and have people in place who respond to that. And we can never lose sight of that, because if it is just about one and done, you vote and you go home, then you've lost the entire point of why people have fought for so long to access this process.
That was a word. That really did. That spoke to me. I don't know what I was about to say. That was I actually guess I'll tie that to another one of our audience questions, which is, what can we do, or how can we be sure, where can we find confidence that our vote really is being counted, or that it really does matter?
So I'm gonna start off with that one, and then I'm gonna purposefully kick it to Tram after this. Some of the laws that Tram went over are specifically for that reason. So Tram went over the highlights of the big things that kind of made the headlines, but then there's some like nerdier details about how elections work that if you ever want to see Tram smile big, you start talking about those. So I wanted to cue you up and see, can you maybe talk about the cure process or some of the things that we've done in order for us to really have a system that works well?
I do really geek out over our election code. When the pandemic hit and I was packing up things that I need for my office to come home with me, the one thing that I grabbed was the Virginia Code Book 24, Code Section 24. It's all of Virginia's election laws. And thank God I did, because we were trying to figure out, like, I remember back in May and June with the primaries coming up, like, oh my God, what can we do? What do we delay? What we do? So yes, I geek out over it. Thank you, Sia. So yeah, we did put a lot of like wonky sort of process things in place too that aren't super sexy, but are super important, right? So when we think about a mail-in ballot, there's so many rules around what you have to do. You have to fill out your information exactly as it appears on your voter registration record. So your name, your first name, middle initial, last name, address, everything has to be precise so they can match your record with your ballot that you've mailed in. It used to be that if you made a mistake, your ballot wouldn't get counted. You wouldn't actually even know. You wouldn't find out in advance, right? And so now, if there is something wrong with your ballot, you have the registrar's office has to notify you and has to give you an opportunity to fix it, to cure it, as Sia said, so that you can make sure that that gets counted. We also know that there are delays in mail sometimes, right? And so if you mail back your absentee ballot, it used to be that if it didn't arrive or it wasn't in the hands of the registrar's office by 7 p.m. on election day, that's it. And there have been instances in a couple of cycles where, you know, ballots were sitting in the PO box, and it could have been there by 7 p.m., but the staff person didn't go pick it up in time, or whatever. And so now we have a rule in place that as long as it's postmarked on or before election day, right, and it's received, you know, after election day up to the Friday noon on Friday, you know, post, then it'll also get counted. So we've done a lot of these things to make sure that, you know, ballots have every opportunity to be counted. But I also want to speak to another thing around election integrity in general. I think that's a big conversation that's happening across the country. We're seeing Arizona and Georgia sort of take a look at their 2020 ballots or audit things. And I will just note for folks that in Virginia, we did conduct a risk limiting audit, right, after the 2020 election. And the report came back and it was, I mean, basically it said, we can trust our election results. If you want to talk about election integrity, you can trust the results here in Virginia. And frankly, you can trust the results across the country. Let's be real here. And to me, the election integrity conversation needs to be, you know, if we want to talk about it, is how many people can actually vote, right? If our country was founded on the principles of participation and democracy, then to me, an election has full integrity when every citizen has the opportunity to cast their ballot, right? Why are we keeping people away from that? Like, if we want a truly reflective democracy, we really want truly reflective leaders, then, you know, the integrity of our elections depends on people's ability to actually freely participate.
And don't say an election doesn't have integrity when people of color and young people participate, right? And know what that is when you do it that way. Can I say one thing? Because I love this topic too, which is very concretely, right? The 2 Senate seats in the runoff election in Georgia, just stepping back, we fail in communicating with communities about why should I do all this to vote? Why does it really matter in my life? Like, why should I go through all of this? I don't think we have won that because our civic education is the way that it is, because for many reasons. But we can do a better job at saying to people, you know, in the city of Birmingham, for example, the city council tried to raise the minimum wage above the federal requirement because they had the authority to do that. Now, unfortunately, the state legislature came in because it's been gerrymandered and it overrode what the local did. But I think we need to explain to people that this is how power works. And this is why it's not just important that what your city council looks like, but this is why redistricting matters and why your state legislature matters, because someone can give you a better policy and someone can come in and try to take it. But all of it is, this is why it matters. Or in Florida, your state attorney, Aramis Ayala, she said, I'm just not going to impose the death penalty. I know that there are issues of discrimination and until that's corrected, I'm not going to do that. Or, you know, in Ferguson, after everything that we know about it, we're exposed to how this city council, their role in who runs the police department. Those are the types of things that I think we have to do a better job of, like, connecting the dots for people. And frankly, before I started doing this work, I didn't understand how any of this worked. I didn't understand why any of it mattered. And it's a constant education. And I think we need a much, much better job of concretizing people. Like, why does it matter that my ballot counts? Why does it matter that I have a fair map? And provide people with real examples of how that changes their lives in very material ways.
Yes, those were two really powerful answers. There were two great answers, but two different perspectives, and like the zoomed in nitty gritty, which I also love. I love the details, but also, you know, zooming out and thinking about the big picture as well, and thinking about our community and how we can encourage each other and zoom out and zoom in. So that was wonderful. Thank you. We only have time for one last question, and we're eager to hear from all of you on this one. And the last question is just, well, it's a bit of a statement and a question. One of our audience members voiced that they feel as though nothing much has changed if we're still in this fight for voting rights. Does fighting really make a difference?
I think, I think it does, right? And I think there's Virginia, and then there's like the rest of the country. And sorry, I'm getting a call. Let me just decline it real quick. Yes, I mean, just to Leah's point, like, elections have consequences and elections matter. And I think the fight for voting rights and this expansion of voting rights and what we fought for, at least here in this state, has resulted in so much change, right? If you think about all of the first and the South policy wins that we have had in the last year and a half alone, has been, like, you know, just monumental. Not only the Voting Rights Act, which we already talked about, but, you know, the first state in the South to end the death penalty. We have a first, you know, state in the South to pass the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. We have done a whole lot around criminal justice reform. You know, when we talk about, you know, access to healthcare and education, we've done a lot. And that's because, you know, people showed up, and because our General Assembly is more reflective of Virginians. Look at the diversity of the General Assembly. It has changed tremendously. When I first started lobbying and advocating in the legislature, which was a little over 10 years ago, I remember being the only Asian face, like, really, like, and I remember there was one debate whether we needed to rename the Sea of Japan in our textbooks to something else, because there was a whole Korea-Japan thing. And as the resident Asian that walks the halls of the General Assembly, every legislator was like, well, how should I vote on this, Tram? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, that's not my issue, right? And just because I'm Asian, you want to ask me that question? I can't speak for all Asians. So I think, yes, it all matters. And I will say, because in Virginia, we have all turned out to vote, we've expanded the electorate, right? We are seeing this generational change that's happening. And I will also note that it sometimes feels like it's too slow, right? And I feel that too. The change that I need to see in our communities, it is slow. But if you think about it, we are trying to undo a system that was not built for us, that has been in place for centuries. And to rebuild it, right, to tear it down and rebuild it is going to take more than just a couple of years. And so what we have to do is continue to fight, continue to show up, continue to hold our elected leaders accountable so that that change can really happen. I mean, really talking about a 400+ year system that was built intentionally to leave all of us behind, to leave Black people behind initially. And now as you know, the country is becoming more diverse, leave all people of color behind. And so it feels slow, but we are making progress, and we're making generational progress as we speak because of people like Sia and because of people like the folks on the Virginia Block team that are in your communities doing the work every day, having these conversations and connecting the dots for people. And that's the critical work. We are our heroes, and I think we just have to keep fighting.
Yeah, I would just add, and it's hard to add to that because that was such a great answer, but I think you could take a little bit of heart from what's happening in Virginia. I mean, don't get too down. A lot of times we focus on the national news and the national picture. You see what's happening in Georgia, and Leah did a great job of sort of laying out just how viciously voting rights are being attacked and how hard folks are working to turn back the clock across the country. But in Virginia, we're actually making some progress. I mean, we went from being 49th in the country as far as access to the ballot box to 12th. Now, that means there's 11 states we need to get past, and hopefully we get past because we make it easier, not because they go the wrong direction, right? But for me, that was really important. I mean, there's a reason when Democrats took over, I'm gonna be a little partisan for a second, but the reason when Democrats took over the General Assembly, House Bill 1 was to get rid of the excuses for absentee voting and to make it possible for people to vote early, right? To expand early voting opportunities, because we know that when Republicans take over state legislatures, the very first thing they do is they make voting harder. That's how they try and lock in their majority. The good news for progressives and Democrats is the way we lock in our majority, and get a generational type of majority in place is to make voting easier, which also happens to be the right thing to do, right? And make it easier for people to participate everywhere. And so we're doing that. And as Tram said, it's a process, and we can't do it all overnight, but we're getting there really, I think, a lot faster than a lot of folks expected. Now, the other thing is, and it's fatiguing, believe me. I know how fatiguing it can be because the other side is relentless. And it feels like if you let your foot off the gas for just a minute, if one election goes the wrong way, it can all come undone really quickly. And I get how that feels. And that's why the work that we're doing on voting in particular is so important. Built in, frankly, a little bit of a margin for error by making voting really easy, really accessible, making sure that those ballots that arrive do get counted, as we heard about, making sure that people can vote when it's convenient for them, that it's not just a 9 to 5 on election day kind of activity anymore. So we're getting there. It does matter. It matters in policy outcomes. It matters in representation. And we're gonna continue to move up the ladder because everybody participating is the way it needs to be and needs to work. So I appreciate the question. I'm sure she's got more to add.
Thank you. I just want to add very, very briefly, we are only 1.5 years outside of being Georgia. This would have been Georgia if things didn't change in 2019. And so that is how urgent this is and how we can't get comfortable because it's still so new. We have bills that we passed in 2020 that had an enactment date for 2022. So we haven't even implemented all of the things that we passed yet. That's how new this is and how important it is that we keep fighting. And then just secondly, I'll say 2019 didn't just happen. It was a decade of work and organizing, and the things that we're doing right now, that's what it took to get the shift. So we don't want to take for granted that Virginia just happened to get ourselves out of something, because it wasn't that. It was everyday grinding, like by community organizers from New Virginia Majority, volunteers with AKA, volunteers with Ivy Baptist, volunteers with Virginia Block. And so that's why this conversation is so important, because we want to protect what we have and then carry it further. And I do kind of want to situate that celebration moment in the uphill battle of all of us have family in Texas, Florida, Arizona, or Georgia. And so, yes, we can celebrate what has happened in Virginia, but that next step is making sure that these pass on the federal level so that our family members in any other state, human beings in any other state have that fair representation and protection as well. And so I think that situates it in yay, but also let's get to work on that other next part. So wanted to add that. And we are now at the point that I want to say thank you to our community members who were brave enough to ask questions and share their stories and who were awesome volunteers in the fight. And thank you so much for our panelists, because this information has been helpful to know the context. And now we're going to shift into hearing from Cindy, kind of boil down what we've heard, and then the Virginia Block team is going to help you from what you heard. How do you actualize that if you're participating in the election that is occurring right now? So first, we want to say thank you to the panelists and the community members. Thank you so much. And then let's hear from Cindy for the boil down highlights. And then the team is going to actually help you know the particulars for how to exercise your right if you're participating in the Democratic primary.
Yes, thank you, Thea, and good evening, everyone. So I'm going to quickly recap what we've heard so far. We're focusing on healthier communities in Virginia Block. This is why we're doing the town hall, get an action plan based upon that. We have Tram speaking, who's fighting voter suppression, and who really gets into the nitty gritty of the election code of Virginia. And then Delegate Simon talked about the redistricting commission. We had a huge conversation about redistricting and why that's important, because we need to be represented. Everyone has that right to be represented, and redistricting is one of the main ways to do that. Leah talked about her work with LDF and with Virginia and coming up with their voting rights law, and really dived into how to fight voter suppression and why that is even important in the first place. And she brought up a really good point about why we need to get that message out to the community as a whole. And then we did our Q&A, and we talked about more redistricting and the need for fair maps and how do you even draw that, and how to talk about communities of interest with the census, and why that's important, why that count is so important. So that's what we talked about so far. And then one really good nugget that we got from that was the phrase where she said, I think it was Tram or Leah, elections have full integrity when everyone can freely vote and participate in them. That's our recap.
Thank you so much for that recap, Cindy. So everybody's still here, still with us, doing good? We can see your thumbs up reactions. We can see your heart reactions. We can't see in your living room or your car, but we can feel the love. So we're glad you're still with us. And we're going to pivot right on into our next section. And so we've heard a lot tonight about protecting our voting rights, expanding our voting rights, all of the things that Cindy just mentioned to us. And we also want to uplift that part of the process of protecting our vote, of protecting our democracy, is actually participating in elections and exercising that right to vote. And so with that being said, we're actually going to pivot into a voter education training, which you should be able to see on your screen now if you're on mobile. But if you can't see it, just let us know in the chat and we'll be sure to still get you that information. So like we mentioned at the beginning of the evening, we are Virginia Block, the Virginia Black Leadership Organizing Collaborative. Our mission is to build empowered communities. We want to build safer and healthier communities where we can not just survive, but that we can live and that we can truly, truly thrive. The approach that we take to do that is a threefold approach through integrated voter engagement, civic involvement, and leadership development. So what do we mean when we say those three things, right? When we talk about integrated voter engagement, we're talking about any and everything that goes into an election. All the work that we do, whether it's talking to a friend, calling a family member for their voting plan, having, phone calls with our loved ones, or a webinar just like this. all the work ahead of the election to get to the ballot box and to not just get people there because we told them so, but to have people feeling educated, empowered, and excited to cast their vote. And then after election day has come and gone is when you get into civic involvement. And that's going to be the things that we do to keep people engaged, to continue holding our elected officials accountable, to bring new folks into the work, and finding ways for people to advocate on the issues they care about and continue with the accountability of the people we elected. And the third part being leadership development. We always joke that a good organizer organizes themselves out of a job, but it's only like a half joke, right? Because we want for folks to feel so prepared, so equipped, and so on top of things that they feel like, yes, I can be the leader in my life with this club or this organization, in my friends and family, with a faith-based organization. We like to help folks feel empowered and equipped so that whatever it is that they're looking to do, that they want to do, they know that we're here if they need us, but you also feel ready, right, to take on that battle and to do so successfully. So you might hear us mention throughout the presentation, or if you follow us on social media, the hashtag #ItStartsHere. And what we mean when we say that is really just a reminder that voting, a very, 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 very important step, is still just the first step, right? Even after the election has come and gone, we have to continue in the work that we do. We have to continue holding electeds accountable, and we have to continue, like we were mentioning earlier, to stay alert, aware, and keep our foot on the gas. So the next election that we have coming up here is going to be the June Democratic primary. Election day itself is on June 8th. The polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. But just because election day is June 8th, if you're participating in this primary, you don't have to wait until then. You can go online to Citizen Portal and request an absentee ballot. You can vote early in person, all kinds of things you can do. But for anyone who's looking to request an absentee ballot online, you're going to want to take a picture, grab the link out of the chat, write it down with a pen and a notepad. This link is going to be like your best friend. And that link is tinyurl.com/VAB voter reg. So when you go to that link, whether you are on your desktop, a mobile phone, a laptop, you're going to see a screen that looks like this. Citizen Portal. It's a website directly from the Virginia Department of Elections, and it has a bunch of different things, bunch of different options on the homepage. You'll see the option to register to vote, check your registration status. You can find your polling place, see if any changes in that regard have happened. You can apply to vote by mail, that absentee ballot that we were mentioning. And for folks who are not registered to vote currently, and you want to register to vote, or maybe you're talking to loved ones about registering to vote, unfortunately, it is going to be a little bit too late for the June primary for brand new registrants, but that's okay. Just remind them that there's an election in November, or remember that there's an election every year in Virginia. So even if they're not able to participate this time, there will be plenty more opportunities. And for folks who needed to maybe update their voter registration but didn't get a chance quite yet, you can still participate in this June primary. Just remember that you're going to have to go to whatever precinct you were previously registered at, or if you live in the same city or you've moved to a different city, you're going to want to go to the locality or the registrar that you were previously registered at in order to vote on election day, or if you're voting early. But you can still vote in the June primary, even if you need to update or if there's been some changes. And so once you click any of those buttons that were on the last homepage for Citizen Portal, you'll see a screen that looks just like this. You'll just enter in the information. Remember, it's a Virginia Department of Elections website, so don't be nervous to enter your social or anything. It's a secure platform through the Department of Elections. And also make a special note to enter the locality that you're registered in. So again, if you've moved or if you need to update, there's been some changes, just remember the system has to find you. So to use your locality that you're registered in, when you're looking for your information.
Thanks for that, Samora. So like she said, this November, there's a general election, which will include the following offices on your screen. So that's governor, lieutenant governor, your attorney general, your delegate, your sheriff, the Commonwealth attorney, the treasurer, and the commissioner of the revenue. And as Leah mentioned earlier, even your local officers are extremely important. It's all interconnected. And so with that being said, so to choose their nominee for the general election, the Republicans had a convention this May, and the Democrats will have their primary June 8th, like Samora mentioned, to choose theirs. So let's go over what the ballot will look like in Newport News and Hampton, which is VA Bloc's main area of operation. So you will see that not all of the offices in the general election ballot are on the primary ballot. If it is on the ballot for the primary, then that means multiple people are running. So we have to choose our nominee. If they aren't on the primary ballot, then only one Democrat is running in that race. So in Newport News, you only have your statewide offices, and that's the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. And then in Hampton, there's your statewide offices and your local offices, which includes the sheriff and the treasurer. And if you want to know more about what they do, all these officers do, please follow us on social media. We have civic lessons every Friday, usually on social media, and you can turn your post notifications so you'll see what they do, and we'll cover all of those offices. So you can vote early in person now until June 5th if you haven't already. In Hampton, that's the voter registrar's office, and the address, dates, and times are on screen, so take a picture if you need it. And then in Newport News, you can go to City Hall or City Center, and again, take a picture of that if you need it. But this information will also be available at the link in the chat that we have for you. And I'll drop that real quick for you guys. So then we also have ballot drop boxes. So there are drop boxes at the same location to drop your absentee ballot off. So in Newport News, that's City Hall and City Center. In Hampton, there is definitely a drop box, but you do go up to the registrar and hand in your ballot there, or you can hand in someone else's ballot. They can't make it up there to the second floor. On election day, you can take your ballot to any voting location in the city where you're registered. So now these dates are extremely important. So please write these down or take a mental note, take a picture. The deadline for requesting your absentee ballot by mail is this Friday, May 28th at 5 p.m. The last day for in-person absentee/early voting is Saturday, June 5th at 5 p.m. And we also post reminders about those deadlines on social media, so be sure to follow us. Thank you.
Okay, so when we're talking about elections, what does it mean to be an empowered voter? And that starts off by knowing, why does this election matter to you? We want you to connect with your why. So your story of change that brought you to wanting to talk to other people about voting and electoral work. So part of that is understanding, how does this election impact my life? What can this election change for me? Is it positive? Is it negative? And then we want to figure out, what do you care about? And how can these topics be affected by an election? Don't make elections about candidates, make them about you. So do you want more funding for schools? Do you want to reform how we police in America? Make these elections about you. And so importantly, do your research, gain knowledge about the areas you care about from credible sources. You can research candidates' stances on the issues that you care about, and you can even look into their history, especially their voting history. And if you hit a roadblock with all of that, it's okay, it happens. Please reach out to a group like us. We're here to answer the questions that you may have. And we have to understand and know that, yes, there are generational differences, but know that the struggle for Black liberation has spanned across many generations. And while the approaches may appear different, the movements of the past are the building blocks upon which we build our healthier communities. So intergenerational movements are so incredibly powerful because we are always stronger together. And we all have a reason for wanting to vote, wanting to do this work. And nobody's reason is any better or worse than anybody else's. They're just different. So our elders are saying that, I vote because my parents couldn't, or I voted because I marched. And the youngins out here saying, I want to get involved, and I may have started this because my mama told me to, but I'm here. And one of the commonalities that we share is that we want to use our voice. And so understanding that, yes, we come with different reasons, but us moving forward is really focusing on the similarities and the using our collective voice. And so usually when we're talking to people and we are asking them what they care about, they usually fall into these categories: education, mental health, criminal justice reform, women's empowerment, economic justice, and voting rights. So when we're talking to people in our lives about voting, it's like, oh, you care about education, that's great. We can say it's important to have a governor who cares about education because he appoints this, he or she or they appoint the Secretary of Education, and the Department of the Department of Education is under the executive branch. Or when we talk about how we want to elect an attorney general who understands women's rights, who will protect them from any encroaching laws at the federal level, because the attorney general is the main lawyer for the state of Virginia. So that's what we talk about when we talk about understanding what people care about and how it connects to elections. So to recap all of that, because I know that was fast, to recap all of that, ask questions. Ask people what they care about, because when you know what they care about and you listen to what they care about, you can connect those things, just like I did for you all, connecting education to how having a governor who cares about it is important. And so be informed and share the information. You have this information that we're giving to you tonight, share it. Share it far, share it wide, and be honest. Don't lie, don't shame, don't do any of that. Just be direct and be honest with the people in your life, because that really helps all of us connect to our story of change and our whys. And last but certainly not least, when you are talking with people in your life who may need restoration of rights, understand that they are eligible once upon completion of incarceration. It is a process. So if they want to get their rights restored for the November general election, please, please, please tell them to apply today, because the process is a little slower. And so it's a very simple process. You go to the website on the screen, restore.virginia.gov, and you fill out just a simple application. It doesn't take long. And if you have any questions or someone in your life needs help with this, please reach out to us today.
All right, so you have all of this awesome information from the panelists that we invited on and from our organizing team here. You might be wondering, what do you do with all of it? Well, it's very simple. We want you to pass it on to your network, just like Hugh suggested, because your family, friends, and neighbors need to know this information as well. So how you can help, we'll start with checking in with your family and friends to make sure that they have a voting plan. You can also, to make sure, and that all entails that they know when the election is, they know their options for voting, they are following, liking, sharing, and commenting on Virginia Bloc's posts on their favorite social media websites, such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, because we post a lot of information just like this that we've had tonight, and it can help a lot of people. And you can also help us out and your friends and your network out as well by by turning on our post notifications, so that whenever we post, which is about 2 to 3 times a day, you get a ping to your phone, to your computer, and you see, oh, they're talking about, civics lessons that Cindy was talking about earlier. Oh, this is the deadline today to make sure that I vote early because I don't feel like dealing with the lines on election day. So that's what we would like for you all to do. And then we want you to invite 5 people to join us in this work. When I didn't say me, I said us, because you're in with us as well. So we want you all can host a virtual meet and greet with us. You all can host us for a workshop. That can be for an organization. We've had workshops with church ministries. We've had workshops with sororities in the past. Whoever you want to invite us to talk to about voting, we would love if you can have us. We would also love if you could help us make phone calls into the community and volunteer with us, which some of you on this call have actually done with us before, and to make sure that the entire community, whether they're a part of our network or not, they're all vote ready. And so we're going to put this link in the chat. If you have excess means to donate to folks in the community who have been struggling throughout the pandemic financially, we would love if you could help us out with our COVID relief fund. The link is bit.ly/give to COVID relief. And again, we're going to put that in the chat. And we also have a link available for folks who would like to apply for aid as well. So if you've been struggling during these trying times, you can also apply for aid as well. And the link for that is bit.ly/direct aid application. And we'll drop that in the chat for you as well. So yes, at this point, we're going to pause. We know we went over so much in such a little bit amount of time. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A box, and we would be glad to answer them for you.
And so we know that we did have the one question about the drop boxes. So we went over that in Newport News and Hampton. So if that is not the city where you're in and you want to know more information about drop boxes in your locality, you can drop us a question in the chat or in any of our social media. And we have one question for the group. The last day for early voting is the same for all localities, correct? And that is correct. Across the Commonwealth, June 5th is the last date to vote in person. And then, of course, the deadline to request it be mailed to you is Friday the 28th. If you find that you got it mailed to you and you look up and it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday before election, don't mail it. We love our postal workers, but we also know that the mail has been impacted by the higher ups. And so we can no longer just say, oh, it's just going to get there in 2 days like we used to. Go on and use that ballot and take it back to either your registrar's office or on election day, any polling location in the city where you are registered. And so as you're thinking about your questions, Mike, if you could stop screen share. We are available to you at any time on our social media, our website, our email addresses, all of that. But we want to thank you again for joining us this evening. And thank you again to our partners, Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Lambda Omega Chapter, and Ivy Baptist Church. And of course, thank you to our panelists who dropped so many nuggets about voting rights this evening. Tram Nguyen of New Virginia Majority, Delegate Marcus Simon, and Leah Aden of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So we covered a lot of ground and we learned about voting rights, and we hope you either learned something new, got a refresher on something that you knew about, or either heard a different perspective in order to get you thinking about voting rights in a new way. So the key is that we use what we've learned to take action, and you're about to hear some actions you can take specific to voting rights and also how to join the work that we're doing to build healthier communities. I'm also going to drop a book list that we've kind of put together, some of the resources that we've personally found helpful, but you can feel free to add to the website list some of the resources that you found helpful as well. Our members have worked hard to get the wins that we've gotten. And if you're not a part of this group yet, we welcome you into this space, in this lane, to join us as we fight for more.
Thank you, Sia. So we have more amazing virtual town halls planned for the summer. So for June, there will be 2 sessions. The first one on police reform will be held on June 15th at 6:30 p.m. And the second one is on economic justice. That'll be held on June 29th at 6:30, so at the same time. And we will drop those links to register in the chat right now. So go ahead and register right now. And we'll also be posting those on social media. So again, make sure you're following us. You can sign up and contact us, message us. For more, put our website so you can have our contact. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening, everyone.